translators in New Zealand, including his family members. I think this shows, in my view, probably if we look at the process, if you've got a senior official from Immigration New Zealand making such decisions, I'd love to see the comparative analysis done, this case compared to other cases. And then secondly, I would think, given the high-profile case that it is, probably needs to go back to Minister or Associate Minister of Immigration.
Yeah, it was process we were most interested in, and you've raised it. Prominent barrister Jonathan Krebs is joining us. Jonathan, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Jim and panel members.
Did you raise an eyebrow about process in this case?
Not about process. I did raise an eyebrow about outcome, as one of your panel members said. I mean, the first blush reaction is, not sure that this person should stay. But when I thought through it, you've got to be a bit careful not to double count things. I mean, the first thing is that he offended a second time whilst on bail. Well, his penalty for that offending will have reflected the fact that he offended while on bail. That's what judges take into account, and they add a bit on for that. So I think he got 2.5 years with it, something like that, for the second offence. And that being the case, it probably wasn't up there in terms of the most serious sexual offending. You call it sexual offending, but it doesn't sound like it was rape or anything of that species. It was some lesser sort of sexual offending. Not to diminish it, of course. So the offending on bail has been taken into account. When it comes to parole, the parole board are very jealous about granting parole, in my experience. They don't like granting parole on first occasions unless there's very good cause to do so. So something here has persuaded them that this man deserves parole, despite the fact that there were 2 offences, and it was probably his first time applying for it. So,
yes.
The family weren't there when he was committing the offences, plainly. But it sometimes happens that families rally round to help somebody rehabilitate.
Do you suspect, the point Peter makes, Jonathan, the senior Immigration New Zealand official has granted him a deportation liability suspension. Wouldn't you think this might warrant the attention of the Minister himself?
I'm not really, I'm not an immigration expert. That was my first reaction too, but then I thought about it some more, and I thought, well, I don't know actually how many people a month or a year are granted these exemptions, and whether this is anyway out of the norm. I mean, if it's out of the norm and just happens to have come to a media person's attention, then that doesn't make it a high-profile public case. It just makes it a public case. It isn't of any considerable importance. If, on the other hand, it is outside the ordinary, then perhaps it is something that Minister Corbyn might like to just cast his eye over.
Because we've all heard over the years about people refused entry to New Zealand, or people actually deported for seemingly less. Because I think the Shia family, that was a well-known case. The father didn't declare a drug offence in Germany. So is there appearance of inconsistency or some illogicality here that should?
There's without doubt the appearance of inconsistency, but there's also the fact that we don't know all the ins and outs of this. We don't know why the man is here with a residence visa. The fact is he comes from Afghanistan. There may be all manner of considerations that the immigration department or senior officials took into account.
Sure. Yes, that we
as a refugee.
Indeed. Jonathan Krebs, very nice to have you on. Thank you. Thank you for joining us too. On the panel today have been Brodie Kane. Nice to see you back.
Lovely to be here, thank you, Joe.
And always nice to see Peter Whaafeyu back.
Thank you.
Whawhatai, love it. And we are back tomorrow, thank you. No, of course not, Wednesday. Thank you, everybody, and have a good Anzac Day and Checkpoint with John Campbell coming right up.
Kia ora everyone, I'm Sharon Brett Kelly, and on behalf of our excellent team, haere mai, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Tonight, an exclusive interview with tourist driver Kenneth Walneck. At his sentencing this afternoon, the cardiothoracic surgeon from the United States was ordered to pay $165,000 in reparations following a fatal crash which killed 2 men in February. Tonight, Mr. Walneck talks to John about the restorative justice process and how the crash has changed his life. Also tonight, a cabinet reshuffle sees promotions for Jerry Brownlee and Nikki Kay. New Zealand considers whether to bolster security checks for passengers flying from Muslim-majority countries.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon, ko Katrina Batanaho. An American heart surgeon whose careless driving resulted in 2 men being killed and 4 other people being injured has been ordered to pay $165,000 in reparations for emotional harm. 63-year-old Kenneth Walneck was sentenced this afternoon in the Nelson District Court, where Judge Richard Russell described it as one of the largest ever orders of its kind. Walneck and his wife were holidaying in Mapua 2 months ago and had just left on a day trip when he realised they were headed in the wrong direction. His U-turn on the coastal highway between Richmond and Mapua caused an accident involving his vehicle and 2 others. 41-year-old Stephen Jays of Nelson and 69-year-old Kevin Whitburn of Christchurch were killed. In sentencing, Judge Russell said no sentence could ever compensate the victims, but he credited Walneck for his remorse and offers of help. He quoted from one of the victim impact statements, which he said revealed the extent of forgiveness.
You have had a very successful career helping people and returning loved ones back to their families. I hope you are able to continue saving lives and making a real difference in the world.
Judge Richard Russell in the Nelson District Court this afternoon. The Prime Minister has rejigged his cabinet lineup, giving foreign affairs to Jerry Brownlee and education to Nikki Kaye. The changes have been made because Murray McCulley and Hekia Parata are leaving Parliament at this year's election. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
Bill English says the diplomatic skills Mr Brownlee has shown as Defence Minister make him well qualified for his new role. Mr Brownlee's current portfolios have been divvied up between other ministers. Nathan Guy gets Civil Defence and Nicky Wagner Christchurch Regeneration. Defence goes to the Rodney MP Mark Mitchell, who's been promoted to Cabinet, while Simon Bridges takes over as Leader of the House. The new ministers will be sworn in on May the 2nd. Atuiti Whare Pārimata ko Chris Bramwell aho.
The Labour Party's Canterbury Issues spokesperson, Megan Woods, says the fact that the new Christchurch Rebuild Minister will not be in Cabinet confirms the government is pushing Christchurch down its priority list.
I think it's anything other than a blip. If you want to ring me up at the end of the year and
The Labour MP Megan Woods, we didn't have that audio. The final voting figures for the first round of the French presidential election have confirmed that, as predicted, Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen will face each other in the second round runoff in 2 weeks' time. Mr Macron got 23.75% of the votes and Ms Le Pen 21.53%. Forest owners say the recent spate of workplace deaths in the sector is a statistical blip. 3 of the 7 people killed in workplace accidents in the past fortnight worked in forestry. Between 2011 and 2013, there were 19 forestry deaths, and between 2014 and 2016, there were 8. A spokesperson for the Forest Owners Association, Don Carson, says the sector has put more money into health and safety than any other major primary industry, and the figure for the past fortnight doesn't reflect that.
it's anything other than a blip. If you want to ring me up at the end of the year and it's continuing on, then I'll certainly disembowel myself in a very public manner. But at the moment, it looks like a statistical blip. These things happen in little patches. It's the overall picture and the overall trend that really counts.
Don Carson of the Forest Owners Association. Disability support workers throughout the country are planning to stop work for an hour on Thursday morning. Their union E2 says about 3,000 workers object to their hours being cut and are calling for more job security. They're employed by the country's biggest provider of services for the disabled, IDEA Services. An E2 spokesperson, Alistair Duncan, says some staff have had their working hours slashed and have had to work antisocial hours.
The critical issues for us are around job security and respect of hours. Because of the funding structure that the government forces IDEA to work under, hours can be chopped or changed at very short notice. That's not fair on the workforce, and it's certainly not fair on the people they support.
Alistair Duncan of E2. It's 5:04. Sport and boxer Joseph Parker says he will be fighting in Auckland on May the 6th. Parker was supposed to have been defending his WBO heavyweight title against Britain's Hughie Fury, but Fury has pulled out because of a back injury. Parker's promoters are now scrambling to find a replacement in time, and the 25-year-old is confident it will happen. Central District's pace bowler Adam Milne has been recalled to the Black Caps' 15-man one-day squad for the Champions Trophy in England in June. Injury has kept him from playing for New Zealand since the 2020 World Cup in India last year. Also in the squad are Mitchell McClenaghan and all-rounder Corey Anderson. The Northern Mystics will be taking some momentum into tonight's rematch with the Central Pulse in Wellington. In round one of the ANZ Netball Premiership, the Pulse pipped the Mystics by just 1 goal. But after 2 losses, the Mystics have won their last 2 games. Assistant coach Jenny May Clarkson says they know the Pulse will be better this time.
As are we. For us, it's understanding what they will put out on the court, but more so about what are we going to do in terms of our own strategy. So, yes, we've taken a look at them, but now we look forward to how do we best play on attack and how do we best play on defence.
Jenny May Clarkson. The game starts at 20-8. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, the neuroscientist Jim Fallon. He's a borderline psychopath. Worked it out after he ran a series of tests on himself. He's quite a nice guy, really. Mind you, we weren't in the same room when I did the interview. We have a window on the word of Elizabeth Kwanage. She turned 117 the other day. Well, our computer scientist Mark Appley discusses the Internet of Machines on Nights with me, Brian Crump, from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Kapiti Coast. Also Coromandel Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Taumaranui and Taihape. Fine apart from a few showers in western Northland, clearing this afternoon. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Waitarapa, cloudy periods and a few showers in Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, spreading to Waitarapa tonight. Wellington, mainly fine, but drizzle in the south this evening and tomorrow morning. Nelson and Marlborough, fine, apart from areas of cloud tomorrow morning. Buller and Westland, fine today, becoming cloudy tomorrow with drizzle south of Hokitika. Canterbury, mainly fine in the afternoons, but areas of low cloud or fog in the evening and mornings. Otago and Southland, cloudy with patchy light rain, becoming confined to eastern Otago tomorrow morning, then clearing to fine tomorrow afternoon. Fiordland, cloudy periods with drizzle patches, and the Chatham Islands, cloudy at times with drizzle this evening. It's 5:07 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
And good evening and welcome to the program. And don't forget, you can join us on Facebook Live at rnz.co.nz/checkpoint, on Freeview Channel 50 and on Sky, Face TV Sky Channel 83. Before 5:30 tonight, promotions for Jerry Brownlee and Nikki Kay in the Cabinet reshuffle, and a 101-year-old takes her marks at the Masters Games. But we begin tonight in Nelson, where an American tourist has been sentenced this afternoon on 2 charges of careless use of a motor vehicle causing death and 4 charges of careless use causing injury. At the Nelson District Court today, cardiothoracic surgeon Kenneth Walneck was ordered to pay $165,000 in emotional harm reparations. Mr. Walneck was holidaying with his wife when, in his own words, he made an ill-advised U-turn into the path of a truck on State Highway 60 near Nelson in February, killing 2 men, 41-year-old Steve Jays and 69-year-old Kevin Whitburn. 4 others, including Mr. Walneck's wife, were injured. Mr. Walneck suffered concussion and has no memory of the accident. Kevin Whitburn's widow, Janet, spoke to Checkpoint a week after the accident while she was still recovering from her injuries. She said that while she forgives Mr. Walneck, she also chose not to meet with him during the restorative justice process. We'll get her reaction to his sentence shortly. But first, Kenneth Walneck spoke exclusively to John Campbell here in the studio at the request of the Whitburn family about the weight of his guilt.
To put it mildly, an ill-advised U-turn on this state highway, I think you call them, at a particularly inauspicious point, and thereby precipitated the accident. As I understand it, the driver of the truck who was killed in the accident swerved to avoid me, striking our vehicle and ending up in oncoming traffic where he struck another vehicle, or the vehicle and its trailer. I'm not sure of. And I believe the driver of that other vehicle was also killed.
Kevin Whitburn and Steve Jace were the people killed, right?
Right.
And Kevin Whitburn's wife Janet has been on this program.
Yes, I had heard that, and I haven't had the pleasure of meeting her, but I have met 3 of her children.
And she said, and it was quite remarkable to hear her say it, it was an accident and she forgives you.
Yes, when I was told that, a couple of weeks afterwards, I don't recall how, when she appeared on your program. But to be perfectly honest, as the widow of somebody who was, killed in this tragedy that, that I precipitated, it was remarkable to hear that, but entirely consistent with everything, what I heard from everybody, who I had the chance to speak with about this in New Zealand, who was familiar with the accident or not.
You're saying you've been the recipient of, and I'm paraphrasing here, immense kindness and a sense that people understand this was an accident, as terrible as that accident was.
There's absolutely no propensity to blame me
Do you blame yourself?
from any of your countrymen.
Which is a lovely reflection, I think, on, I hope, on us. But do you blame yourself?
I think it's impossible not to. Yes, I hold myself responsible, for, causing this mayhem.
Can we talk about the issue of driving on New Zealand roads? Now, I've driven on American roads, and there is a paternalism about American road construction, which means that you never are in any doubt about where you're going at any stage. And you drive on an American highway, and it is marked and laned, and there's median barriers, and you are, Whereas you drive on a New Zealand highway, and it's a misnomer. The word highway is a misnomer. It's a country road, and there's traffic coming towards you, and there's lots of discussions about this because the bulk of our tourists, setting aside Australians and Brits, actually not the bulk, I don't know, a number of our tourists come from places where you drive on the other side of the road. Is it problematic? Did you from time to time think, where the hell am I? Where am I going? Am I on the right side of the road? Did all of that stuff happen, or did you get it?
Honestly, I was just constantly reminding myself, wide and right. It's the left turn that's easy here, not the right turn. And one or two times that I can recall, first thing in the morning, we're driving out of our B&B or wherever we're staying, and I'm stopping to make the turn onto the highway that we're going to move on to the next magnificent site to go see. And I would stop, and all of a sudden, and I would call my wife's attention to it, and I would laugh. I go, I'm on the wrong side of this driveway. And generally, that was it for the rest of the time, for driving that day or otherwise. So yeah, I did get it. But it was a matter of concentration. Mm-hmm. It was a matter of willing myself to be aware of it all the time. And I have to say, it wasn't the most relaxed excursions, on the roads, because I was constantly thinking, what am I going to do wrong or something, happily, absolutely nothing happened until Nelson.
New Zealand's very different from the United States. And one of the ways we're different is that, first of all, there are no lawsuits here because of ACC. And secondly, there is this sort of thing of restorative justice, right? And so you are meeting the families. Have you been through that process?
The counsellors that I've met who have facilitated the meetings are all about bringing, some peace and closure to all the parties involved.
And how hard was it for you to meet people whose loved ones you had, through this accident, caused the death of?
Well, I was forewarned that it would be a potentially brutal process. I haven't found it to be brutal at all. It is, it shakes me to the bone. and I would never want to volunteer myself to be put in the situation of having those meetings and confrontations, but they haven't been confrontations. They have just been a process, through which I can only hope that some peace is brought to these, poor grieving folks, and a process through which I can make some kind of restoration. Impossible as that is.
And say sorry.
Well, that's the start. And for some people, that appears to have been enough. Just the acknowledgement of responsibility and expressing, profound, as unimaginable as their grief may be, I find it difficult to put into words how sorry I am about that. There was a period of time right after the accident, particularly when I was made aware of the fact that the unequivocal opinion was that I caused the accident, that I certainly felt like I'm going to spend a good long time finding a rock to crawl under and not wanting to peek out too much. I think some of that was the concussion. But some of it undoubtedly was the rawness of how it felt to have that, that awesome guilt. And to some extent, I almost feel guilty speaking about myself because, I was injured, my wife was injured, but, our lives will go on. So it's been a straightforward process. And like I said, I can only hope that it brings some peace to the folks, who are affected, and particularly the families who have lost fathers and husbands and sons.
What were they like, those families, when you met them?
Well, apart from the fact that they were clearly grieving, they were ordinary good folks. I learned about the two men who died. They were both, fathers and husbands. I met one father and one wife, and like I said, some children, adult children, and got to see pictures of some lovely young boys who unfortunately are going to grow up without a father. They just seem like good, solid citizens. So, I can only imagine how acutely their losses felt. And I hope that there's some way that I can, do right by them.
And that's Kenneth Walneck speaking to John Campbell before today's sentencing. And Mr Walneck's $165,000 reparation payment was described by Judge Richard Russell as one of the highest ever handed down. It included $80,000 to Monique Hardiman, the partner of truck driver Steve Jays, who was killed in the accident. Ms Hardiman told Checkpoint she had met with Mr Walneck but didn't wish to comment on his sentencing. A further $35,000 was awarded to two injured passengers of the truck Mr Jays was driving, and widow Janet Whitburn was injured in the accident which killed her husband Kevin. She was awarded $50,000. She spoke to our producer Bridget Burke just after sentencing from her home in Christchurch.
I'm glad that he didn't get a prison sentence, and we will just have to see how this pans out. This is actually another step in the closure for us, really, of our connection with him. The support has just been overwhelming. The police, the fire, the hospital, everybody, restorative justice, victim support, our lovely friends, our family, and our community. And it's a tribute to the lovely man that Kevin was. He was a fantastic man, and he would have been doing this for others if the boot had been on the other foot.
Widow Janet Whitburn speaking to our producer Bridget Burke a short time ago, and we'll hear more from Mr Walneck and from Janet Whitburn's son Greg after 6 o'clock tonight. Coming up, the Cabinet reshuffle, why today felt like a Saturday for those who didn't take the day off, and a 101-year-old's golden run in the 100 metres at the Masters Games. And we'd love your feedback, particularly on John's interview with Kenneth Walneck. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us, Checkpoint with John Campbell, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. And don't forget you can watch us online on Facebook Live at rnz.co.nz/checkpoint, on Freeview Channel 50 and on Face TV Sky Channel 83. Well, Jerry Brownlee has been appointed the Minister of Foreign Affairs in what's expected to be the last cabinet reshuffle before the election. Nikki Kay will take over from Education Portfolio from Hekia Parata, who along with Murray McCulley is leaving Parliament. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
Prime Minister Bill English says Jerry Brownlee understands the demands of foreign affairs, and the diplomatic skills that he's shown in his defence portfolio means he's very well positioned for the new role.
Jerry has built up a very significant set of relationships with our partners through his role as a Defence Minister, and has done a very good job of that in a relatively short time. And I think in Christchurch he's shown the ability to be blunt when he needs to be, but also diplomatic when he needs to be, and very effective.
Mr English was asked whether Mr Brownlee would keep the portfolio after the election should National win, or whether it could go to a potential coalition partner like Winston Peters.
You know, I'm appointing him now as Foreign Minister, and it's certainly my expectation that if we win the election, he'll continue as Foreign Minister.
Mr English says Jerry Brownlee can be blunt, but Mr Brownlee says he's ready for the job.
Oh, I think the number of years I've had in politics, of course you're going to get into situations where people may not be happy with the way in which you've characterised a particular situation or otherwise, but this is about New Zealand's best interests, representing New Zealand on a much wider stage, and I think there's a natural caution that comes with that.
Mr Brownlee's current portfolios have been divvied up between other ministers. Nathan Guy gets Civil Defence, and Christchurch Central MP Nicky Wagner takes on Christchurch Regeneration. The Defence portfolio will be taken up by two-term Rodney MP Mark Mitchell, who's been promoted to Cabinet. Bill English says Mr Mitchell had a good track record as the Chair of Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Select Committee.
In fact, built quite a reputation there for both his competence and his ability to build relationships. So he's been promoted outside Cabinet just 2 or 3 months ago. He also has a fairly unique personal background that's relevant to the portfolio.
Mark Mitchell elaborated on Mr English's comments.
He's probably referring to the business that I had overseas before I came back, where a large part of what I was doing, in fact initially in 2002, I was part of re-establishing the Iraqi security forces and also responsible for delivering the training for the command element. So he's probably referring to the experience that I've had overseas, especially in high threat and conflict areas.
Was it a private business that you had, or was that working with the Defence Force?
Initially it was working with Defence Forces and for the British government when I first went out, and then I actually formed my own security and risk management company. 2
new ministers were announced today, Scott Simpson and Tim McIndoe. Mr Simpson will be the new Statistics Minister, along with Associate Environment and Immigration. He says the environment portfolio fascinates him both personally and politically.
I see looking after and protecting our beautiful natural heritage. Obviously here in the Coromandel we've got an awful lot of it, and I'm very keen to make sure that the protections that are in place in our part of the world are across the country.
Tim McIndoe has been National's senior whip for some time and had been previously tipped as ready for a ministerial role at last year's reshuffle. He picks up the customs portfolio along with associate education and transport. Mr McIndoe says education in particular is an area he's thrilled to be getting back into.
I had quite a long background in education, and so I'm delighted to have been given that opportunity, and particularly pleased to be working with Nikki Kay, who's been a great friend. She and I have both been great admirers of Hekia Parata in her time in the role, and I know that Nikki will step up and be an excellent Minister of Education, and I'm delighted to be working alongside her.
Nikki Kay returned to Parliament this year after recovering from breast cancer. She was not available for an interview, but said on her Facebook page that since she came into Parliament she's dreamed of an opportunity like becoming Education Minister. Social Housing Minister Amy Adams takes on responsibility for the Crown Land Programme and will have more involvement in the government's house building programme. However, Construction Minister Nick Smith will continue to oversee building regulation. The new ministers will be sworn in on May the 2nd. Atu i te whare parimata mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Chris Bramwell.
Now, on today's greatest irony, a 101-year-old woman has won sprinting gold at the World's Masters Games in Auckland. Man Kaur is the only athlete at the Games in the 100-plus age group, so she won gold by simply turning up at the Waitakere Trust's arena. Here's Paul Moore from the Masters Games Media Centre with more.
The gun to start the women's 100 metres ushered in the new star of these World Masters Games, 101-year-old Man Kaur from India.
मुझे बहुत अच्छा लग रहा है यहाँ पर तो सारे जितने भी हैं सारे मेरे बेटे हैं मेरे बेटे मैं बेटे देख के बड़ी खुश हो रही हैं बहुत खुश हो रही हैं
She is very happy being here and she feels like everybody is her son.
Running into Games history and instant celebrity in a time of 74 seconds, this tiny woman from Punjab then disappearing under a scrum of media and fans.
खुश आएगी दौड़ने में भी खुश आएगी काम करने में भी खुश है हम रोटी पकाते हैं
She brings the happiness in there. She runs, she walks, she cooking, she's just full of joy.
And her joy was plain to see when she received her gold medal from Masters Games board member and pole vault legend Sergei Bubka.
Until she's alive, until there's a life, she's going to keep rocking.
She's rocking, running, she will keep on running, she will never give up.
She's never going to give up. She's an Indian bold lady.
This bold lady from India, who only started running at 94, believes she still has plenty more to offer. For starters, she's got the 200 metres and the shot put still to come.
She is going to run again. She's not going to give up.
Whatever may lie ahead for this remarkable athlete, she's now happy to bask in the golden glow.
Paul Moore reporting. New Zealand is considering whether to bolster security checks for passengers flying from Muslim-majority countries in the Middle East. The United States, Britain and Australia imposed stricter measures last month, in some cases banning larger electronics on flights, citing intelligence of a possible attack. Now New Zealand's aviation authority is deciding whether to follow suit. Here's our political reporter Craig McCulloch.
While in Dubai over the weekend, the Transport Minister Simon Bridges told media the Civil Aviation Authority was looking into whether it too would boost security checks. The Prime Minister Bill English today weighed in.
There is a balance there between the inconvenience for passengers, many of whom live off their laptop if they're regular travellers, but on the other hand making sure that the flying is safe.
The United States last month banned laptops and tablets on flights from 8 countries in the Middle East, North Africa and Turkey, citing a possible security risk. The UK immediately introduced similar restrictions, but not in Qatar or the United Arab Emirates, where it instead requested extra security checks. Soon after, Australia also asked for extra checks in both countries, the only ones with which it has direct air links.
These are countries with whom we work pretty closely on security issues. If they've made the decision, there'll be reasons for that, and CAA are looking at it.
But that doesn't necessarily mean New Zealand will take the same approach.
We are a safer place than most of these other countries. We're just further away. In that sense, we want to make sure that the requirements we put in place are tailored to what suits us.
The Centre for Aviation, based in Sydney, says the sudden rollout of new measures around the world has been a shambles. Its executive chair is Peter Harbison.
There seems to have been a pretty severe lack of good cooperation and coordination between key countries. There's very much a need for a whole lot more cohesion with these sometimes knee-jerk reactions to particular unspecified threats.
An aviation commentator, Peter Clark, says it would be extreme for New Zealand to target the United Arab Emirates and Qatar.
It solves nothing. We have profiling, we have ways of x-raying now, we have everything possibly available. Those countries provide that already. The moment you start targeting specific airports, the risk moves to another location.
The Civil Aviation Authority says it's continuing to talk to international and local agencies to evaluate security intelligence. It says New Zealand faces no specific threat and there's no precise timeframe for any changes to its security regime. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
Here's some feedback now on John's interview with American heart surgeon Kenneth Walneck, who was sentenced today for a fatal car crash which caused the deaths of 2 men near Nelson in February. Hi John, I've driven in the USA several times and U-turns are the easiest things to make a mess of when you're driving on the other side. I recall 2 instances where I came very close to causing an accident in the same way as your guest. I just got lucky. That's from Stan in Dunedin. Restorative justice works much better than prison, which costs $95,000 per prisoner per year. Let's put much more resourcing into restorative justice. That's from Peter. And from Lynette Tui, doesn't this tragedy seem more tragic when all the people involved in an equally admirable way, act in an equally admirable way that only illustrates the hugeness of the human loss? And what a thoroughly decent man. Hard to hold any will against him. That's from Ian McCallum. Well, coming up after the news, hefty jail terms for 7 members and associates of the Headhunters gang for their involvement in a methamphetamine drug ring. France's election is now a 2-horse race. And residents living near sewage ponds in Christchurch describe feeling like prisoners in their own homes after a decade of coping with swarms of midgets at night. But first, here's Katrina Batten with the headlines.
An American heart surgeon whose careless driving resulted in the death of 2 men near Nelson says he holds himself responsible. Kenneth Walneck was sentenced in the Nelson District Court today in order to pay $165,000 in reparation. The 2 men died in February when Walneck made a U-turn into the path of a truck on State Highway 60. One of the dead men's widows says it was an accident and she forgives Walneck. Nikki Kaye has become Education Minister in a cabinet reshuffle and Jerry Brownlee takes over Foreign Affairs. The changes have been made because Murray McCulley and Hekia Parata are leaving Parliament at this year's election. Mr Brownlee's defence portfolio has gone to Mark Mitchell, who's promoted to the 20-member cabinet with a ranking of 20th. Forest owners say recent workplace deaths in the sector are a statistical blip. 3 of the 7 people killed in the workplace accidents in the past fortnight worked in forestry. The Forestry Owners Association says the sector has put more money into health and safety than any other major primary industry, and the death toll for the past fortnight doesn't reflect that. The French people have chosen the 2 candidates who'll go through to the final round of the presidential election in 2 weeks. As opinion polls have been suggesting for weeks, they're the centrist Emmanuel Macron and the nationalist right-winger Marine Le Pen. New Zealand is considering whether to bolster security checks for passengers flying from Muslim-majority countries in the Middle East. The United States, Britain and Australia imposed stricter measures last month, in some cases banning larger electronic devices on flights, citing intelligence of a possible attack. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6.
Kia ora, Katrina. Now turning to business news with Giles Beckford. And good evening, Giles. And another New Zealand software company is flexing its commercial muscles overseas.
Indeed. Good evening to you, Sharon. Yes, it's a company called Gentrack. It develops software and sells it to utilities, which they use for billing, customer records, or in the case of airports where it's quite popular, they can keep a track of passenger movements and the like. Now, the company has been on quite an aggressive growth strategy, and it's decided that if you can't develop software or you don't cover certain aspects amongst your own products, go out there and buy it. And what they've done is to buy stakes in 2 companies, one in Denmark and one in Malta. They are both in the aviation sector, and they give things and offer services and programs which Gentrack's own products don't do. They will boost Gentrack's earnings, perhaps not too much this year, but next year. And they're expecting that, in fact, in a couple of years' time, it will double the earnings of their airport business or aviation business. So from their point of view, they're out there expanding. It's in Europe, but of course, these things have global applications. The thing, of course, is that people may be just a shade wary of software companies, and we've had quite a few of them in New Zealand in the past 5 years or so. They do burn a lot of cash before they start to earn the cash. And Gentrack is paying for this out of debt. People with a reasonable memory will, of course, think of Orion Health, which recently warned that it hadn't got a lot of sales over the line and its earnings would be lower as a result. Its share price was hammered. So a wee note of caution, but it's a company that's going places, and for the time being, at least, investors seem to be quite impressed by it.
And Giles, a couple of things to watch out for this week from the Trump administration.
Well, as if we needed to give any more publicity to Donald Trump. But yes, a couple of things which markets will be looking out for quite closely. On Wednesday, he's been promising that he will unveil details of the biggest ever tax reform in the United States history. We might take that with a Twitter feed or three. But people will be waiting at least to see some of the principles that he's outlining there, to see whether this will provide stimulus for American stocks and companies. And if so, we could expect to see a bit of a run and a rally on stock markets, and that might flow around the rest of the world. And at the end of the week, the administration needs to cut a deal on budget spending to avert a shutdown in federal government activities, or at least some of them. And the sticking point seems to be how firm Donald Trump will be in insisting on getting money through in the budget, which can be spent on building that wall on the border between the United States and Mexico. That one will be an interesting one. It will be a test of his ability to move people in Congress, and of course it will be seen as a significant mark on the 100th day of his administration. We watch for both of those things with interest.
And much happened on the markets today, given tomorrow's a holiday?
I think a lot of people played hooky today and had themselves a 4-day weekend. Our own share market was up 25 points to close at 72.23, but the turnover was only about 2/3 of what we would see on average. New Zealand dollar 70.3 US cents and 93 Australian. And we should note that the euro had quite a strong rally on the back of that French presidential first round voting result. A sigh of relief that it looks like Emmanuel Macron is now odds-on favourite to win the second round in a couple of weeks.
Thank you very much, Giles. That's our business editor, Giles Beckford. Well, 7 men have been given hefty jail terms for their involvement in a sophisticated drug ring that made and supplied methamphetamine. The men, all members or associates of the Headhunters gang, were arrested in 2015 after raids on properties in Auckland, Waikato and the Bay of Plenty. The police seized property worth more than $2 million, including cash, more than 20 cars and motorbikes, 2 properties and a boat. At a trial earlier this year, the men were convicted on various charges relating to the manufacture, sale and distribution of pea. Reporter Sarah Robson was at the High Court in Auckland for the sentencing.
The syndicate's ringleader, William Hines, has been sentenced to 18.5 years in prison, with a minimum non-parole period of 8 years and 4 months. Justice Downs said Hines was the architect of the operation and everyone else involved in it reported to him. About 1 kilogram of pea had been manufactured from close to 4.5 kilograms of the precursor drug, Contact NT. About 136 grams of pea was found by the police in a storage unit, along with a black van, firearms and large quantities of other chemicals used for making methamphetamine. Hines' trusted second-in-command, Travis Sadler, was primarily responsible for sourcing the large amount of precursor. He then provided updates to Hines about progress on the anticipated manufacture. Sadler will have to serve at least 9 years of his total sentence of 18 years and 2 months in prison. The cook, Peter Atkinson, was described by Justice Downs as having a troubling record of drug-related offending. He said the 73-year-old's expertise was integral to the success of the operation, and he continued to pose a risk to the community. The Police National Manager of Organised Crime, Detective Superintendent Greg Williams, says it was a significant operation.
These men, some of which were patch members of the Headhunters, were operating on behalf of the Headhunters, running a commercial enterprise, manufacturing and selling meth into the community. And, as we keep saying, this is real harm being generated in the community to users and their families from the violence and offending associated with meth use.
Greg Williams says there are a lot of criminal gangs running sophisticated business-like operations because there is so much money to be made from pea.
They're making the profit off the back end of it, and there's the temptation for them, isn't it? The profit part to it. But at the end of the day, these men are looking at significant periods of in jail, away from their families and out of the community.
The 4 other men received sentences ranging from more than 4 years to more than 16 years behind bars. For Checkpoint, Sarah Robson, Aho.
France's presidential election is now a two-horse race between the centrist Emmanuel Macron and far-right candidate Marine Le Pen. With 96% of the votes counted from yesterday's first round, Mr Macron won 24%, with Ms Le Pen on 22%. The outcome is a huge defeat for the centre-right and centre-left groupings that have dominated French politics for 60 years. The Conservative and Socialist candidates urged their supporters to now put their energies into backing Emmanuel Macron and stop any chance of a second-round victory by Marine Le Pen. Here's the BBC's Katja Adler.
One presidential election, two rival visions for France. Fresh-faced Emmanuel Macron tops poll projections, promising fairer government, neither right nor left-wing. A pro-EU centrist confident of success.
Je souhaite, dans 15 jours,
I hope that in a fortnight I will become your president.
le président de tout le peuple de France.
I want to become the president of all the people of France, the president of the patriots, in the face of the threat from the nationalists. A president able to protect, to transform and to build.
Emmanuel Macron now goes through to the second and final round of France's vote for president. Against far-right Marine Le Pen, anti-immigration, anti-globalisation and anti-EU. Her presidential plan? France for the French.
The time has come to get rid of all the arrogant people who wanted to dictate to the population what they should do. I am the candidate for the people.
Ever since polls closed, this crowd has waited to see the woman they want as the next president of France, Marine Le Pen. Her campaign slogan is, "In name of the people of France." And if you hear the insults her supporters throw at political rivals, you'll see that France is extremely divided.
There were clashes between police and voters frustrated with the projected election result. This has become known as the most stressful election in modern-day France. Up and down the country, in bars and living rooms, people were glued to their screens as soon as polls closed. Left-wing candidates crushed. Their supporters were bitterly disappointed.
I am terribly disappointed. Now we know France is full of rich people and racists. I'm not going to vote at all in the second round.
Monsieur Macron and Madame Le Pen are now on the charm offensive in the lead-up to the final presidential vote. Their political visions may be clear, but their parties have never been in government. Whichever candidate France chooses, it will be a jump into the unknown.
The BBC's Katja Adler reporting. North Korea has continued to aggravate the US with claims it could sink the aircraft carrier Carl Vinson as it heads for the peninsula. Adding to the tensions, North Korea has detained a Korean-American man in his 50s, bringing the total number of US citizens held in the country to 3. Pyongyang is now repeating the claim a single nuclear weapon could destroy America's entire power grid, a suggestion originally put forward by the CIA. The explosion would send out an electromagnetic pulse, resulting in famine, societal collapse, and what one newspaper has called a dark apocalypse. Charlotte MacDonald decided to take a closer look at those claims.
It's not something I've stayed up late at night worrying about before this.
Like many of us, Yoni Applebaum, Washington bureau chief at The Atlantic magazine, didn't realise that he should have had North Korean nuclear attacks high on his list of worries until he spotted a headline on the US political website The Hill, also mentioning this stat.
How North Korea could kill 90% of Americans. Oh my goodness, 90% of Americans. That's an awful lot of people.
The article was written by two men, former CIA boss James Woolsey and White House nuclear advisor Peter Vincent Pry. The weapon they warn about is...
It's an electromagnetic pulse. Fries anything with a circuit board. That means all electronics, appliances, anything with wires.
Yes, that's right. An EMP, an electromagnetic pulse, the weapon of choice for action films and TV shows.
I was curious. It said, according to the Congressional EMP Commission, a single warhead delivered by North Korean satellite could black out the national electric grid and other life-sustaining critical infrastructures for over a year, killing 9 of 10 Americans by starvation and societal collapse.
As evidence, the article linked to a US Congress report from its EMP Commission.
As I searched, I couldn't find any substantiation in the congressional report. There was no casualty projection whatsoever.
He went back to the newspaper article to see where this headline figure of 90% had come from. A second link in the article led him to some congressional testimony.
That contains a remarkable exchange between individual congressmen and the chair of the Congressional EMP Commission. The congressman says that he has recently read a pre-publication copy of a novel called 1 Second After, and the novel includes the story of a ballistic missile EMP attack on the United States, and the congressman asks the chair of the commission whether this is plausible, and the chair says, well, we think that's in the correct range. We don't have experience with losing the infrastructure in a country with 300 million people.
A fictional scenario from a science fiction novel seems to be the only source for the claim North Korea could wipe out most Americans. Sharon Burke has a very good idea how worried we should be of EMPs. She spent most of her career in the US Department of Defense and is now a senior advisor at policy group New America, studying the risks posed by nuclear weapons.
The starting point for that kind of electromagnetic pulse is that you have to have pretty high-yield nuclear weapons, and you have to be able to detonate them in the atmosphere over someone else's country. It's not clear at all that the electricity grid would be knocked out. That's a possible effect, and it's certainly a cause for concern.
So how confident is she that America's electricity is safe?
As far as the day-to-day most prevalent risks, it's not an EMP, it's, squirrels and all the things that cause outages all the time.
That's right, squirrels. Should we really be more worried about hungry squirrels than North Korean missiles?
I think we should be worried about both.
And that's partly because an EMP missile is just not a very good weapon.
You can't be 100% sure that if you detonate a nuclear weapon, that it's going to destroy the electrical grid under the detonation, because there's no evidence that that would happen. And it seems to me that if North Korea is going to start World War III, I'm not sure they would take their chances. I think they would just drop such a weapon on the ground where they know it's going to do a great deal of damage.
But don't worry if you don't find this particularly comforting. You are not alone. In case you're wondering what happened to the congressman who first cited the 90% figure, based on a science fiction book that he'd read.
After becoming increasingly concerned about the threat of EMP warfare, he now lives alone in a mountain cabin in West Virginia, preparing for the apocalypse that he evidently believes is quite possibly imminent.
The BBC's Charlotte MacDonald with that report. Residents living near the sewage ponds in eastern Christchurch say they feel like prisoners in their own homes after a decade of coping with swarms of midges at night. And they say there's been no improvement despite the council spending nearly $800,000 tackling the tiny insect problem. Conan Young reports on the repeated attempts to get on top of the midges and the Aranui residents who are losing patience fast.
Paul McKinley says the midges are so bad at night that he now stays indoors as soon as the sun goes down.
Feel like we're trapped in our own homes. Can't have parties at night or barbecues and bits and pieces which we used to be able to do. Yeah, it's just a nightmare. Early mornings you get out to go to work and the windows are smothered with them and they get in your face and in your car and you eat them.
The problem developed after the settling ponds were cleaned up about 10 years ago, providing a better breeding ground for the midges. Another local, Sharon Nevitt, says staying on top of the swarms of insects is almost a full-time job.
They're just dead bodies everywhere, and you've got to keep the fly spray going and on them. They get on the ceiling and just everywhere. And we get a lot of daddy longlegs here too, because they just love all the midges, keeping them healthy and big.
Pensioner Janet Prophet says the midges also attract large numbers of birds, which leave droppings over washing in cars. She says the summer months, when the midges move off the sewage ponds and fan out to surrounding houses, are the worst.
In the daytime, in the summer, they're all over the houses. That's where they sit in the sun. And, I mean, at night time, if you've got the lights on, well, this is when they come back, and it's just, your windows are just black. But the council have told us that we just have to keep the doors and windows shut and the lights off. Well, that's not living, sir, is it?
Janet Prophet is now at the end of her tether.
They're there all the time, you're cleaning all the time, you're shaking, you're washing. You can't go outside, they're in your cup of tea. It's just absolutely...
In your cup of tea?
I ran a cup of tea the other day. I don't know how it got in, but it was floating on the cup of tea.
It's really starting to impact on your sort of quality of life now, isn't it?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, it is. And I mean, my other neighbours, we don't want to be here, but there's nowhere we can go.
Paul McKinley says he'd be keen to move too, but doubts anybody would want to buy his home as long as the midges remain a problem.
We feel like we're not being listened to sometimes. It's just because we're over the east side of town, they don't care. I'm not saying that they haven't tried or they're not doing anything, but what they are doing isn't working. It's getting beyond frustrating. I'm starting to get quite angry about it now.
Nobody from the Christchurch City Council was available to be interviewed. In a statement, it says it has spent close to $800,000 over the past 5 years on measures to control the insects, including a synthetic insect hormone. A spokesperson says there is no easy solution and that adding salt to the ponds is not an option, as it would harm other wildlife such as birds. In Ototahi for Checkpoint, ko Konanyang tēnei.
Unions say the recent spate of workplace deaths shows the forestry industry and WorkSafe are not doing enough to keep workers safe. But the forestry sector says the deaths are a statistical blip and don't reflect the steps the industry has taken to improve its health and safety record. Catherine Hutton reports.
7 people have been killed in workplace accidents in the last fortnight, which brings this year's workplace death toll to at least 17. The latest deaths all happened in what WorkSafe calls high-risk industries. 3 in forestry, 2 in farming and 2 in construction. The Council of Trade Unions President Richard Wagstaff says he hopes the last fortnight is a blip, but he's sceptical.
There's been a lot of store placed in the idea that we've got to change the culture of work, and I agree with that. And in many ways it is a bit like turning around an oil tanker. Cultures just can't change with a memo with a click of a finger. But having said that, we're not really seeing on this evidence any real change in our dreadful fatality rate at work.
He points to the forestry sector where, despite improvements, workers continue to tell them health and safety is still not taken as seriously as it should be.
They tell us that the employers tend to go through the list of what they have to do about safety, but underneath that is a very strong call to improve production rates, to speed up, to get on with it, to improve the efficiency of the business. And our concern is that we think that this drive for safety is very often drowned out by a bigger call to go faster and achieve higher kind of production tallies.
Don Carson is a spokesperson for the Forest Owners Association. He says the forestry sector has put more money into health and safety than any of the other major primary industries, and the recent spate of deaths is not a trend. He rejects claims bosses are putting money before health and safety.
The bottom line, of course, the people who go into forestry do it to earn a living out of it, so I think that's a justifiable one. But health and safety has been a major commitment. There's been a big wake-up call in the industry, and a lot is being done, and I'm sure that you'll see a continuing reduction in the accident rate as the years go on.
He says the Forestry Industry Safety Council aims to improve health and safety through videos, workshops and research.
And at the moment, for instance, we have an investment in working out why accidents occur rather than who's to blame. That's a piece of academic research to try to make the industry safer by persuading people to tell the story as to why they've had that accident, what persuaded them to do something thinking it was safe. So we learn from the mistakes rather than just trying to find blame at the other end.
But Richard Wagstaff says WorkSafe should be making more of an example of these cases.
The regulator, WorkSafe, is going to have to do a bit more and make the messages a bit stronger about what's tolerable and what's not, and reflect harder on the near misses and so on, because, my suggestion would be that we just tighten up the screws a bit on everything else that's operating.
WorkSafe Chief Executive Nicole Rosie says there's only so much it can do.
We're never going to enforce our way to, great health and safety in New Zealand. We actually need New Zealand to get on board with the message, and for every workplace and every business owner in New Zealand to be committed to improving their health and safety. that is the way we'll change New Zealand's health and safety outcomes.
Nicole Rosie says that change needs to be led by businesses and individuals. For Checkpoint, Catherine Hutton.
In his first major speech of the British election campaign, the British Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has attacked what he calls the tax dodgers and corporate elites. Like Donald Trump and Marine Le Pen, Mr Corbyn is portraying himself as the anti-establishment candidate, except that he's doing it from the political left. The ABC's Steve Kinane reports.
At his first main campaign speech for a snap election that few saw coming, Jeremy Corbyn portrayed himself as the people's candidate who was prepared to take on the establishment.
We don't fit in their cosy club. We're not obsessed with the tittle-tattle of Westminster or Brussels. We don't accept that it is natural for Britain to be governed by a ruling elite, the city and the tax dodgers.
There was little talk of Brexit in Jeremy Corbyn's speech. He wants to make this election about health and housing, education and inequality. In his speech, he framed himself as a political outsider, willing to take on vested interests and to break the rules.
It is these rules that have allowed a cosy cartel to rig the system in favour of a few powerful and wealthy individuals and corporations. It's a rigged system set up by the wealth extractors for the wealth extractors. But things can, and they will, change.
Jeremy Corbyn is Britain's most left-wing Labour leader since Michael Foot led them to an electoral wipeout back in 1983. And many party insiders and observers believe a similar result is looming. John Rintoul, the biographer of Tony Blair, the only Labour leader in the last 40 years to win a general election, says that Jeremy Corbyn is not pitching to the voters who end up deciding elections.
It came across quite well if what you're looking for is a rabble-rousing, anti-establishment, left-wing tribune of the people. But I don't think that is a very good description of the sort of middle England votes that Labour needs to win over to hold the seats it's got, let alone gain more. You know, he is pursuing a completely different approach. He's pursuing the sort of Trumpism of the left approach, which is to present yourself as outside the political establishment. But he's not really interested in persuading middle-class people who think that Theresa May is on balance quite a promising Prime Minister.
We're bigger than we've ever been, we're stronger than we've ever been, and we're more determined than we've ever been.
While Jeremy Corbyn's words may have excited party loyalists in London, the test now is whether they inspire voters elsewhere.
Comedian Guy Williams may have put it best today when he tweeted, "Am I the only person dumb enough to forget to take the day off?" With the Anzac Day public holiday falling on a Tuesday this year, many people decided to take today off and enjoy a 4-day weekend. But those who did make the traffic-free journey into work found many shops and cafes had closed their doors altogether. Edward O'Driscoll, who did come into work today, filed this report.
Who wants to go to work on a Monday and then have off Tuesday? And then, 3 days left to work, so you might as well just have a 3-day work week.
This pizza shop manager in Auckland spoke for many today. Retailers in the normally bustling CBD say they didn't experience the usual morning commuter rush.
It's been so quiet. Not too busy, it's quiet.
It's a bit quiet today.
The foot traffic today, it's a little bit lighter than it usually is.
We have not seen a regular customer in the morning as well.
Some Auckland businesses decided it wasn't worth opening at all. Convenience stores and cafes on Wellington's Lambton Quay agreed that foot traffic was quieter than usual and that it was the most relaxed lunch hour they've had for a while. Residents shopping in the capital's CBD noticed it wasn't as busy, some even admitting they should have been at work.
We noticed straight away this morning that it was more like a Saturday than a Monday. It's something that people are going to do, isn't it? Because it's just too tempting.
Yeah, that's what I've done. I've taken leave to get today off. So I think it's a nice idea.
Yeah, in the train there was not many people.
Well, that's what I've done from where I've been. It's just an extra long weekend.
It's chilled and there's not much people in town, and I'd rather work when there's not much people around.
But if you pulled a 6th day instead of taking annual leave, beware. Employment expert Max Whitehead says people should expect their bosses to be suspicious and ask questions about their last-minute day off.
The employer, in accordance with the Holidays Act, has a right to require a medical certificate from the employee.
And employees are probably, if they haven't already organised one, will have to get a retrospective one. And again, that's going to just add fuel to the suspicion for employers, and it's highly likely that the employee could end up being provided a warning.
He says employees should also remember it's hard to hide in the age of social media.
The boss may just well see you on the beach or wherever you're at the moment, and so you're better off just to be upfront and honest with it.
So if you did pull a sickie today, Max Whitehead says you can expect tough questions when you go back to work on Wednesday. It could be a big price to pay for an extra few hours in bed. For Checkpoint, Edward O'Driscoll.
Some more feedback now on John's interview with American heart surgeon Kenneth Walneck, who was sentenced today for his fatal U-turn which caused the deaths of 2 men near Nelson in February. How about restorative justice for those from the gang making, selling methamphetamine to our kids? That's from Yvonne.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening, ko Katrina Batten tēnei. An American heart surgeon whose careless driving caused the deaths of 2 men in February says he made an ill-advised U-turn. In the Nelson District Court today, Kenneth Walneck was ordered to pay $165,000 in reparation. 41-year-old Stephen Jays of Nelson and 69-year-old Kevin Whitburn of Christchurch were killed when Walneck made a U-turn into the path of a truck on State Highway 60 between Richmond and Mapua. He told Checkpoint he holds himself responsible.
All the kindness and particularly the forgiveness that I've received, from some family members makes that weight, all the easier to bear. It doesn't occupy my thoughts every moment anymore, but certainly, days don't go by without it being, just my presence in the country, reminds me, of the terrible error that I made.
Kenneth Walneck. Judge Richard Russell described the reparation order as one of the largest ever of its kind. The incoming Foreign Affairs Minister, Jerry Brownlee, is confident he has what it takes to do the role justice. The change in portfolio is one of a cabinet reshuffle triggered by the retirement of Murray McCulley and Hekia Parata at this year's election. Nikki Kay picks up Ms Parata's education role and Mr Brownlee hands the defence portfolio to Mark Mitchell in order to take over Mr McCulley's job. He says he's up for it.
The number of years I've had in politics, of course you're going to get into situations where people may not be happy with the way in which you've characterised a particular situation or otherwise, but this is about New Zealand's best interests, representing New Zealand on a much wider stage, and I think there's a natural caution that comes with that.
Jerry Brownlee. The Labour Party's Canterbury Issues spokesperson Megan Woods says the reshuffle is a slap in the face for Canterbury because the new Christchurch Rebuild Minister will not have a seat in the Cabinet. Mr Brownlee's portfolio as Minister supporting Greater Christchurch regeneration has been given to the MP for Christchurch Central, Nikki Wagner, who's already a Minister outside Cabinet. Ms Woods says this shows how the government is pushing Christchurch down its priority list. French voters have chosen the 2 candidates who'll fight it out to become the country's next president. As expected, they are Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen. The BBC's Katja Adler reports.
Voters delivered a slap in the face to France's traditional political parties that have governed their country for the last 60 years. They opted for 2 new and very different presidential visions for France and its standing in the world. Confident centrist Emmanuel Macron favours international trade deals and is a Brussels enthusiast who wants more EU integration, while far-right nationalist Marine Le Pen is anti-globalisation. She wants out of the euro and hopes to hold a referendum on France's EU membership. If she becomes president, it will be a boost to nationalist-minded populism across the continent. Whichever vision France chooses will be a jump into the unknown.
Katja Adler. The second round of voting is in 2 weeks. The Forest Owners Association says some parts of the country now in pine plantations should be taken out of commercial forestry. In Northland, Mangakahia Valley, farmers, environmentalists and local Māori say forestry is silting up rivers, eroding banks, damming streams with debris and making floods worse. The association's chief executive, David Rhodes, says it's fair to say that in some steep, unstable areas, forestry is making a mess. He says such land should be replanted with native species. Mr Rhodes says the association has been working with the government on new environmental standards and the identification of such areas. However, he says asking owners of forestry land to retire it from commercial production may come at a cost. People living next to the Christchurch sewage ponds say they feel like prisoners in their own homes because of swarms of midges that visit them at night. The insects have been a problem ever since settling ponds were cleaned up about 10 years ago, unwittingly providing a better breeding ground for them. The Christchurch City Council has spent close to $800,000 over the past 5 years on measures to control them, but says there's no easy answer. One resident, Paul McKinley, says the midges are so bad at night, he now stays indoors when the sun goes down.
Feel like we're trapped in our own homes. Can't have parties at night or barbecues and bits and pieces which we used to be able to do. Yeah, it's just a nightmare. Early mornings you get out to go to work and the windows are smothered with them and they get in your face and in your car and you eat them.
Paul McKinley says he'd move but doubts anybody would want to buy his home with a problem like this. It's 6:05. To Sport, and Lydia Ko has hired the 2017 Caddy of the Year, Peter Godfrey, as her new bagman, according to the Golf Channel. He previously worked for one of her closest rivals, Aria Jutanagan of Thailand. Ko fired her last caddy, Gary Matthews, after just 9 tournaments together. Boxer Joseph Parker says he will be fighting in Auckland on May the 6th. Parker was supposed to have been defending his WBO heavyweight title against Britain's Hughie Fury, but Fury has pulled out because of a back injury. Parker's promoter, Duco Events, is now scrambling to find a replacement in time, but he's confident it will happen.
Of course I want to fight May 6th. May 6th I've been preparing for this day, so whoever they bring, I'll prepare for it, but I want an opponent who's going to put up a good fight, and an opponent that's going to make everyone think it's a 50-50 fight.
Joseph Parker says he expects to know who his new opponent will be by tonight. Chiefs halfback Finlay Christie has been banned for 3 weeks after pleading guilty to stamping on an opponent's forehead during his Super Rugby side's 16-7 win over the Western Force on Saturday. Christie committed the offence as he tried to clear the ball from a ruck just 1 minute after taking the field. And the Northern Mystics are hoping to redeem themselves against the Central Pulse in tonight's netball clash in Wellington. They lost their last encounter by just 1 goal. The game starts at 20-8. That's the news.
Join us tomorrow morning for our special Anzac Day coverage on RNZ National. At 6 o'clock, we join Philippa Tolley for the dawn service at Pukeahu National War Memorial Park in Wellington. Then, after 7, Mihi Ngalangi Forbes and Colin Peacock with stories of soldiers' service and sacrifice and how our history was shaped by what happened 100 years ago. And at 11, we're back at Pukeahu for the National Commemoration Service. Our Anzac Day coverage from 6 o'clock tomorrow morning on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland to the Kapiti Coast, also Coromandel Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Taumaranui and Taihape. Fine, apart from a few showers in western Northland, they'll clear this afternoon. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa, cloudy periods and a few showers in Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, spreading to Wairarapa tonight. Wellington, mainly fine, but drizzle in the south this evening and tomorrow morning. Nelson and Marlborough, fine, apart from areas of cloud tomorrow morning. Bulla and Westland, fine today, becoming cloudy tomorrow with drizzle south of Hokitika. Canterbury, mainly fine in the afternoon, but areas of low cloud or fog in the evening and morning. Otago and Southland, cloudy with patchy light rain, becoming confined to eastern Otago tomorrow morning, then clearing to fine tomorrow afternoon. Fiordland, cloudy periods with drizzle patches, and the Chatham Islands, cloudy at times with drizzle this evening. It's exactly 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Kia ora, Katrina. Jerry Brownlee and Nikki Kay are the winners in a cabinet reshuffle announced by the Prime Minister Bill English today. Nikki Kay has been appointed Education Minister. Jerry Brownlee will take over Foreign Affairs following the retirement of Hekia Parata and Murray McCulley, who will leave Parliament at this year's election. Here's what Mr English had to say this afternoon.
As you know, Hekia Parata and Murray McCulley will be attending their final cabinet meeting next week. So today I'm announcing their replacements as Ministers of Education and Foreign Affairs, as well as some other changes. Ms Parata will be succeeded as Education Minister by Nikki Kay, who is well placed to assume responsibility for education, having done an extended apprenticeship as the Associate Minister of Education and having particular interest, energy and motivation. Mr McCulley will be replaced by Jerry Brownlee, who is relinquishing his roles as Minister supporting Christchurch, Minister of Defence, Minister of Civil Defence and Leader of the House, so that he can take on the time-consuming responsibility for advocating on New Zealand's behalf internationally, particularly at a time of significant global instability. I want to pay tribute to the outstanding contribution Ms Parata and Mr McCulley have made in their ministerial roles. Ms Parata's relentless focus on student achievement has changed the conversation about learning in all our schools and driven sharp rises in achievement, particularly for our Māori and Pacifica students. Mr McCulley has improved existing relationships and developed new relationships between New Zealand and other countries, while running a truly independent foreign policy for New Zealand. This is not an easy feat, but one he has accomplished in an increasingly complex world. I also want to pay tribute to Mr Brownlee for his unceasing efforts to put Christchurch back on its feet after the 2011 earthquakes and the enormous personal commitment that he's made to that work now over 7 years.
Jerry Brownlee's 6-year reign as the boss of the multi-billion-dollar Christchurch rebuild is coming to an end. The job of Minister supporting Greater Christchurch regeneration has been given to Christchurch Central MP Nicky Wagner because Mr Brownlee is taking over Murray McCulley's foreign affairs portfolio. While some see the change as a positive step for the city, others are concerned that his replacement won't have a seat at the cabinet table. Logan Church reports.
Christchurch locals were quick to respond to the news that Jerry Brownlee wasn't going to be spearheading Christchurch's rebuild for much longer.
Hallelujah. I think it's time for a change, don't you? He hasn't been very kind to a lot of the people that I know, and yeah, it's unfair to pin it on one man, but you know, it's got to be blamed on someone.
No, I think what he's done been pretty good. Can't find any fault with him.
I think he should be accountable for what he's done. Stepping aside is not good enough. He should be still there and should be still fighting for the people of Christchurch.
I think it's in the interest of our country that they get new blood. I think he's probably done enough in Christchurch. It's time to move on.
Mr Brownlee has been responsible for rebuilding Christchurch since Sarah was established after the 2011 earthquake. From complaining about Christchurch residents to calling the previous mayor, Sir Bob Parker, a clown, Jerry Brownlee has certainly left an impression on Cantabrians. However, Labour's Canterbury Issues spokesperson, Megan Woods, says there is now a big concern that the government is pushing Christchurch further down its priority list.
I think it's a slap in the face for Christchurch and for Canterbury. This is a job that the government hasn't finished. They're walking away from it midstream, and it's not good enough. It's not tenable that the Minister for Canterbury wouldn't be sitting at the cabinet table, taking part in the discussions and helping make the decisions that we vitally need in our area.
But the Christchurch Mayor, Leanne Dalzell, says the fact Nicky Wagner is not sitting around the cabinet table is not an issue.
I think that can be sort of overstated. Obviously, one likes to have the influence that one has around the cabinet table. But I know that in terms of her approach, Nicky Wagner's very much into relationship building.
However, former Christchurch Mayor Gary Moore says the government has shown no confidence in Nicky Wagner by keeping her out of cabinet.
Nicky is an apologist for the government rather than a reformer. Christchurch needs reform, and it needs a strong cabinet minister to actually be able to achieve that. And now we've got somebody who has to go with her begging bowl into cabinet when they give her permission to speak to them. And that's Christchurch's lot, and I don't think that's very impressive.
Mr Moore says it feels like the government is closing the door on Christchurch. But the outgoing rebuild minister himself says even though it has been a bumpy ride, he's looking forward to the change.
The number of years I've had in politics, of course you're going to get into situations where people may not be happy with the way in which you've characterised a particular situation or otherwise, but this is about New Zealand's best interests, representing New Zealand on a much wider stage, and I think there's a natural caution that comes with that.
The Mayor of Christchurch isn't planning on wasting any time. She told RNZ News she planned to hold an informal meeting with Nicky Wagner to discuss the rebuild today. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, call Logan Church Tēnei.
The widow of a man killed in a fatal crash near Nelson in February says she's forgiven the man responsible and is glad he escaped a prison sentence. At the Nelson District Court today, cardiothoracic surgeon Kenneth Walneck was ordered to pay $165,000 in emotional harm reparations for the fatal crash which killed 2 men. Mr. Walneck was holidaying with his wife when, in his own words, he made an ill-advised U-turn into the path of a truck on State Highway 60 near Nelson in February, killing 41-year-old Steve Jays and 69-year-old Kevin Whitburn. 4 others, including Mr. Walneck's wife, were injured. Mr. Walneck himself suffered a concussion and has no memory of the accident. Kevin Whitburn's widow, Janet, who was injured in the accident, says that while she forgives Mr. Walneck, she chose not to meet with him during the restorative justice process. But her youngest son, Greg, did. He told our producer, Bridget Burke, that with increasing tourism, he wants more done to keep people safe on our roads.
I think it's great that New Zealand tourism is booming, but I think we need to be smart about the way we work with this and find out some smart, practical solution to reduce the instances of just crazy tourist driving. Some sort of regulation and awareness at as many points as possible at the airports, at online, on websites when people are planning their trips. In his case, it seems to me that he wouldn't be a stupid driver normally, which is very hard for me to swallow as well, given the completely stupid thing that he did in this case. But I don't know if there were some sort of online driver tests talking about New Zealand road conditions. Maybe that freshness in his mind, that might be an extra bit of freshness in his mind that could prevent this. I don't know if that's the case or not. In terms of what he did, it just seems like just a stupid moment that I can't comprehend. And to be honest, in the conversations, he sounds like he can't comprehend that he did it either, or why he did it.
There's Greg Whitburn speaking with our producer Bridget Burke. And before sentencing, Kenneth Walneck spoke exclusively to John Campbell here in the studio at the request of the Whitburn family about the weight of his guilt following the fatal crash.
I made, to put it mildly, an ill-advised U-turn on this state highway, I think you call them, at a particularly inauspicious point. And thereby precipitated the accident. As I understand it, the driver of the truck who was killed in the accident swerved to avoid me, striking our vehicle and ending up in oncoming traffic where he struck another vehicle, or the vehicle and its trailer. I'm not sure of. And I believe the driver of that other vehicle was also killed.
Kevin Whitburn and Steve Jays were the people killed, right?
Right.
And Kevin Whitburn's wife Janet has been on this program.
Yes, I had heard that, and I haven't had the pleasure of meeting her, but I have met 3 of her children.
And she said, and it was quite remarkable to hear her say it, it was an accident and she forgives you.
Yes, when I was told that, a couple of weeks afterwards, I don't recall how, when she appeared on your program. But to be perfectly honest, as the widow of somebody who was, killed in this tragedy that, that I precipitated, it was remarkable to hear that, but entirely consistent with everything, what I heard from everybody, who I had the chance to speak with about this in New Zealand, who was familiar with the accident or not.
You're saying you've been the recipient of, and I'm paraphrasing here, immense kindness and a sense that people understand this was an accident, as terrible as that accident was.
There's absolutely no propensity to blame me
Do you blame yourself?
From any of your countrymen.
Which is a lovely reflection, I think, on, I hope, on us. But do you blame yourself?
I think it's impossible not to. I mean, there isn't any doubt in my mind that, you know, the police are accurate in their recreation, you know, of the accident. In some ways, it might be a strange blessing that I have no distinct memory of what led me to make this, you know, careless mistake. And let me say that, you know, in as humble a way as possible, I believe that words fail to communicate, you know, how dreadful an error this was. So, yes, I mean, I hold myself responsible, you know, for, you know, causing this mayhem.
What is the weight of that accident on you now? How hard is it to carry that weight?
Well, I believe that, well, first of all the kindness and particularly the forgiveness that I've received, you know, from some family members, makes that weight, you know, all the easier to bear. It doesn't occupy my thoughts every moment anymore, but certainly, you know, days don't go by without it being, you know, well, just my presence in the country demonstrates to me, you know, reminds me, you know, of the terrible error that I made. And in terms of bearing the weight, I suppose my preoccupation with caring for my wife at this point has been in some ways a blessed distraction.
How is she?
She's getting along. She's recovering. Of the survivors, I think she was the most seriously injured. I feel bad because I caused her all that pain too. But you know.
Does she remember the accident?
She tells me that all she remembers was seeing the truck coming at us. She doesn't remember the U-turn. She doesn't remember what we were doing before. You know, she does remember, you know, screaming my name, and the thing that she remembers most vividly is that she thought she was going to die.
Can we talk about the issue of driving on New Zealand roads? Now, I've driven on American roads, and there is a paternalism about American road construction, which means that you never are in any doubt about where you're going at any stage. And you drive on an American highway, and it is marked and laned, and there's median barriers, and you are, you know... Whereas you drive on a New Zealand highway, and it's a misnomer. I mean, the word highway is a misnomer. It's a country road, and there's traffic coming towards you, and there's lots of discussions about this because the bulk of our tourists, setting aside Australians and Brits, actually not the bulk, I don't know, a number of our tourists come from places where you drive on the other side of the road. Is it problematic? Did you from time to time think, where the hell am I? Where am I going? Am I on the right side of the road? Did all of that stuff happen, or did you get it?
Honestly, I was just constantly reminding myself, you know, wide and right. It's the left turn that's easy here, not the right turn. And one or two times that I can recall, first thing in the morning, we're driving out of our B&B or wherever we're staying, and I'm stopping to make the turn onto the highway that we're going to move on to the next magnificent site to go see. And I would stop, and all of a sudden, and I would call my wife's attention to it, and I would laugh. I go, I'm on the wrong side of this driveway. And generally, that was it for the rest of the time, you know, for driving that day or otherwise. So yeah, I did get it. But it was a matter of concentration. Mm-hmm. It was a matter of willing myself to be aware of it all the time. And I have to say, it wasn't the most relaxed excursions, you know, on the roads, because I was constantly thinking, what am I going to do wrong or something, you know, when, you know, happily, absolutely nothing happened until Nelson.
New Zealand's very different from the United States. And one of the ways we're different is that, first of all, there are no lawsuits here because of ACC. And secondly, there is this sort of thing of restorative justice, right? And so you are meeting the families. Have you been through that process?
The counsellors that I've met who have facilitated the meetings are all about bringing, some peace and closure to all the parties involved.
And how hard was it for you to meet people whose loved ones you had, through this accident, caused the death of?
Well, I was forewarned that it would be a potentially brutal process. I haven't found it to be brutal at all. It is, it shakes me to the bone, and I would never want to volunteer myself to be put in the situation of having those meetings and confrontations, but they haven't been confrontations. They have just been a process, through which I can only hope that some peace is brought to these, poor grieving folks, and a process through which I can make some kind of restoration. Impossible as that is.
And say sorry.
Well, that's the start. And for some people, that appears to have been enough. Just the acknowledgement of responsibility and expressing, profound, as unimaginable as their grief may be, I find it difficult to put into words how sorry I am about that. There was a period of time right after the accident, particularly when I was made aware of the fact that the unequivocal opinion was that I caused the accident, that I certainly felt like I'm going to spend a good long time finding a rock to crawl under and not wanting to peek out too much. I think some of that was the concussion, but some of it undoubtedly was the rawness of how it felt to have that, that awesome guilt.
What were they like, those families, when you met them?
Well, apart from the fact that they were clearly grieving, they were ordinary good folks. I learned about the two men who died. They were both, fathers and husbands, and I met one father and one wife, and like I said, some children, adult children, and got to see pictures of some lovely young boys who unfortunately are going to grow up without a father. They just seem like good, solid citizens. So, I can only imagine how acutely their losses felt. And I hope that there's some way that I can, do right by them.
Kenneth Walneck speaking to John Campbell. He and his wife will leave New Zealand on Thursday. As firefighters contain the more than 100 wildfires in Florida, residents in central and southwestern parts of the state have been able to return to their homes. But as Colette Luke from Reuters reports, many are struggling with the aftermath.
You can go down the block and see black, 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 and then the green spot.
Florida residents are dealing with the aftermath of over 100 wildfires that have hit central and southwestern parts of their state as firefighters continue to contain the blaze. Charles Davison of Polk County wasn't sure if the firefighters would even make it.
There was a possibility that it wasn't going to get here in time. But they did, and they, as I say, it's amazing what they can do.
But for Anthony Alston of Fort Myers, he returned seeing some of his belongings charred.
4 boats and about 9 vehicles, but the house was still there. All of our animals were safe, and we were safe.
Rain on Saturday, along with the help of firefighters, contained some of the blaze that burned through nearly 30,000 acres in Florida. In Collier County, the 5,500-acre brush fire was 50% contained Sunday morning. Florida Governor Rick Scott said on Sunday that the brush fire in Lee County was believed to have been started by someone throwing out a cigarette butt in the dry weather. Scott added that the evacuation orders in Lee, Polk, and Collier Counties have been lifted. But authorities warn of no rain but high winds and thunderstorms for Monday, which may keep pushing the blaze forward.
And that's Checkpoint for this evening. Thanks for joining us on your radio, your television, online, or however you chose to connect with us today. You can hear highlights in late edition at 10:15 this evening.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. An American heart surgeon who caused the deaths of 2 men says he made an ill-advised U-turn. The new Foreign Affairs Minister, Jerry Brownlee, is confident he has what it takes. People next to the sewage ponds in Christchurch say they feel like prisoners in their own homes because of swarms of midges at night. French voters have chosen who will fight it out to become the next president, Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen. 7 men have been jailed for their part in a gang that made and supplied the drug methamphetamine. Forest owners say the recent spate of workplace deaths in the sector is a statistical blip. And disability support workers are planning to stop work for an hour on Thursday morning. More news and weather at 7.